The day my new manager looked at my face instead of my performance, 20 years of trust vanished in a single sentence. He smiled, called my burn scars bad for the company's image, and quietly erased me from every client meeting, never realizing he had just started a paper trail that would change everything. Richard Collins didn't look at the reports in front of him. He looked at my face. His eyes paused on the burn scar that ran from my left forehead across my cheek before he leaned back in his chair. "We need to talk about your role," he said. I had heard that sentence hundreds of times during my 20 years with the company. It usually meant a promotion, a new client, or another impossible project that somehow landed on my desk because everyone knew I'd get it done. This time, his next sentence erased every expectation. "Your burn scars are bad for the company's image. Starting today, you won't be attending client meetings." For a second, I honestly wondered if I'd misheard him. The office beyond the glass walls buzzed with keyboards, ringing phones, and quiet conversations. Somewhere outside his office, someone laughed. The coffee machine hissed. Everything sounded painfully normal while my career was quietly being rewritten. "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Could you repeat that?" Richard folded his hands. "I said clients expect a certain image. Your appearance," he hesitated just long enough to make it sound calculated instead of cruel, "may make them uncomfortable." I stared at him. "Has a client complained?" "No." "Has anyone questioned my work?" "No." "Then this has nothing to do with my performance." He smiled politely. "This isn't personal, Claire. It's business." I almost laughed. When someone says something isn't personal right after commenting on your face, it's impossible to believe them. For 20 years, I had represented this company in boardrooms, contract negotiations, emergency meetings, and multi-million-dollar presentations. Clients requested me by name. Some had worked with me for over a decade. They remembered that I solved problems before they became disasters. Apparently, none of that mattered anymore. Richard slid a printed schedule across the desk. "Emily Carter will take over your client accounts." I looked at the paper. Emily, 26 years old, 6 months with the company. No major negotiations, no experience leading executive presentations. She also happened to be the daughter of one of the board members. I looked back at Richard. "You're replacing 20 years of client relationships with someone who's never handled these accounts?" "Emily represents the direction this department is moving." The sentence sounded rehearsed. "So does being someone's daughter help with that direction?" His expression hardened for the first time. "I suggest you choose your words carefully." The meeting was over. Or at least, he thought it was. I picked up the printed schedule without another argument and walked out. Half the department looked up as I returned to my desk. People always notice when someone leaves a manager's office looking too calm. Calm is unsettling. Sarah from finance caught my eye for a split second before quickly pretending to read an email. Mark, who had shared the sales floor with me for almost 10 years, opened his mouth as if he wanted to ask what had happened. He didn't. Fear spreads through an office faster than gossip. 5 minutes later, my calendar refreshed. Every client meeting disappeared, one after another. Chicago, Boston, Seattle, Dallas. Even the quarterly presentation I'd spent 3 weeks preparing simply vanished from my schedule. Each invitation was reassigned to Emily Carter. No explanation, no discussion, just a series of automated notifications, arriving like tiny eviction notices. Then another email appeared. Subject: Role adjustment. Effective immediately, Claire Bennett will focus on internal documentation, process reviews, and administrative support until further notice. Administrative support. I read the sentence twice. 20 years of building one of the department's strongest client portfolios had been reduced to spreadsheets and internal paperwork before lunchtime. A shadow stopped beside my desk. It was Mark. He lowered his voice. "Claire, I heard Richard talking this morning." I turned toward him. "He said—" Mark glanced around before continuing. "He said clients shouldn't remember the woman with the scars. They should remember the company." For the first time that morning, anger slipped through the cracks in my composure. Not because of the insult, because he had said it before the meeting, which meant the decision had already been made. The conversation in Richard's office hadn't been a discussion. It had been a performance. Mark looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I shouldn't have heard it." "No," I replied quietly. "I'm glad someone did." He walked away before anyone noticed we'd been talking. I opened Outlook. Instead of deleting the emails that kept arriving, I created a folder. Documentation. Every calendar change went inside. Every reassignment notice. Every email. Every timestamp. Then I opened a blank document and typed everything Richard had said while it was still fresh in my memory. Not what I thought he meant. Not what I felt. Exactly what he said. Word for word. At 2:17 p.m., another notification appeared. Emily had accepted my largest client account. The client replied within minutes. "Claire won't be joining us? Is everything okay?" I stared at the message. Richard had already decided what clients would think. The first actual client had just asked for me. I closed my eyes for a moment. Then I saved that email too. For the first time all day, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about how many people had already left a trail without realizing it. By the end of the afternoon, I had a folder full of documents. By the end of the week, I had a feeling it wouldn't just contain evidence. It would contain the beginning of Richard Collins' biggest mistake. If you think his comment was the worst thing he said about me, you haven't seen what one unexpected witness heard next. The next morning, I arrived 20 minutes early. Not because I had meetings to prepare for. Richard had already taken those away. Instead, I wanted time to organize every email, calendar update, and reassignment notice before anyone else arrived. If this turned into a fight, facts would matter more than emotions. As I walked past the restroom mirror, my reflection caught me by surprise. The scar was still impossible to ignore. 4 months earlier, a fuel truck had lost control on an icy highway. I had escaped the crash alive after firefighters pulled me from my car, but the burns left a scar stretching from my left forehead to my cheek. Recovery took weeks. Returning to work took courage. Returning had never frightened me. Richard Collins did. I straightened my jacket and walked out. By 8:30, my inbox had already filled with new notifications. Client account updated. Meeting ownership changed. Presentation access removed. One after another. Every click told the same story. Another piece of my job now belonged to Emily Carter. I saved each message into the folder I'd created the day before. Documentation. Across the office, Emily was smiling as Richard introduced her to one of my largest clients over a video call. I recognized the presentation on the conference room screen immediately. Every slide had been built by me. Every strategy note, every projection, even the opening joke on the first slide was one I'd used for years. She hadn't changed a thing. Halfway through the meeting, my phone vibrated. It was David Harrison, a CEO I'd worked with for almost 9 years. "Claire," he said, sounding confused, "I'm in the conference room with your new account manager." "I know." "Why aren't you here?" I chose my words carefully. "Management reassigned your account." There was a long silence. Then he lowered his voice. "She can't answer our questions. We've already stopped the meeting twice." Before I could respond, he added something that made me sit up straighter. "Richard told us you were stepping back for personal reasons." I froze. "I never said that." "I didn't think you did." We ended the call. I immediately opened a new document and wrote down every sentence while it was still fresh. Time, date, client, exact wording. No guesses, no opinions, only facts. An hour later, Mark quietly stopped beside my desk. "Can we talk?" We walked into the break room where nobody else could hear us. "I wasn't going to say anything," he admitted, "but after yesterday, you deserve to know." I waited. "The week before you came back from medical leave, Richard asked me if clients had ever reacted to your appearance. What did you tell him?" "The truth." Mark didn't hesitate. "I told him nobody cared. They only cared that you fixed their problems." I let out a slow breath. He didn't like my answer. Mark nodded. He said first impressions matter more than experience. Before I could reply, Sarah from finance stepped into the room. She looked nervous. "I wasn't trying to listen yesterday," she said quietly, "but Richard wasn't exactly whispering." She looked directly at me. "I heard him tell someone that clients remember your scar before they remember your presentation." The room fell silent. Two different coworkers, two separate conversations, the same idea. Neither of them knew the other had spoken to me. That mattered. Back at my desk, another email appeared. This one wasn't from Richard. It was from Human Resources. Subject: Confidential meeting request. Please meet with HR tomorrow at 9 a.m. No explanation, no agenda, just a meeting. I accepted the invitation without hesitation. Across the office, Richard walked past my desk wearing the relaxed smile of someone who believed the situation was already over. He didn't notice me creating another folder. Witness statements. He also didn't notice that, one by one, people had started choosing honesty over silence. By the end of the day, I no longer felt like an employee who had been pushed aside. I felt like someone assembling a case, and I had a feeling HR was about to see much more than Richard expected. Before we continue, I have a question for you. If you were in my position, would you have stayed silent to protect your career, or would you have risked everything to fight back? Share your answer in the comments. I read every one of them, and I'd love to know what you would have done. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. Claire arrived at the Human Resources office carrying a laptop instead of a notebook. She had spent most of the previous evening organizing every email, calendar change, client notification, and project transfer into chronological order, because she had already realized that this meeting would not be one with emotions. Melissa Grant, the HR director, greeted her politely, closed the conference room door, and explained that the conversation was confidential before asking Claire to describe what had happened. Rather than starting with accusations, Claire quietly turned her laptop around and opened a folder labeled Documentation. One by one, she showed emails confirming that 8 major client accounts had been reassigned within less than 24 hours, screenshots proving her access to projects had been removed, and calendar invitations that disappeared overnight without explanation. Melissa stopped interrupting after only a few minutes. She simply kept scrolling through the files, occasionally asking for dates or confirming the names of the affected clients. When she reached the last page, she leaned back in her chair and asked the first question that truly mattered. "Was there ever a formal complaint about your work?" Claire answered immediately. "Not once." Melissa checked the company's internal records herself, compared them with the performance reviews on her screen, and slowly shook her head. Nearly 20 years with the company, outstanding evaluations, record client retention, not a single disciplinary action. The documents painted a picture completely different from the one Richard had been trying to create. Claire then opened another folder containing detailed notes from conversations she had documented immediately after they happened. She explained that she had written every word while the memories were still fresh, because she feared the situation would eventually have to be investigated. Melissa stopped when she reached David Harrison's name. "He's been your client for almost a decade, correct?" Claire nodded. He called me during Emily's first meeting because she couldn't answer several questions. He also told me Richard informed him I had stepped away from my responsibilities for personal reasons. Melissa's expression changed instantly. Without saying a word, she opened another document that HR had received only an hour earlier. It contained a written summary of David Harrison's phone call with the company. The wording matched Claire's notes almost perfectly. Richard had indeed told the client Claire was stepping away voluntarily, something she had never said and never authorized anyone to communicate. Melissa closed the file, picked up her office phone, and calmly instructed her assistant to bring Richard Collins to the conference room immediately. She didn't ask Claire to leave. Instead, she asked her to remain seated. Richard entered several minutes later looking mildly annoyed, clearly expecting an ordinary management discussion. The moment he noticed Claire sitting across the table beside HR, his expression tightened. Melissa wasted no time. She asked whether he had informed David Harrison that Claire was stepping away for personal reasons. Richard admitted he had simplified the situation to avoid unnecessary questions. Melissa immediately corrected him. "That wasn't my question. Was the statement true?" Richard hesitated long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable before admitting that it wasn't entirely accurate. Melissa made another note and continued. "Had Claire received negative performance reviews? No. Had any client requested another account manager? No. Had sales declined under her leadership? Again, no." Each answer narrowed Richard's options until only one question remained. "Then what business reason justified removing one of your highest performing executives from every major client account in a single day?" Richard shifted in his chair before finally answering that he believed the company needed a stronger public image. Melissa asked him to explain exactly what he meant. He tried to redirect the conversation toward branding and presentation, but after several awkward attempts, he finally admitted he was concerned about how clients might react to Claire's appearance after the accident. The room fell completely silent. Melissa didn't argue with him. She simply underlined something in her notes, closed the folder, and announced that Human Resources was opening a formal internal investigation into the reassignment decisions effective immediately. By the time Claire returned to her floor, the atmosphere in the office had noticeably changed. Word spread astonishingly fast that Richard had spent almost half an hour inside HR, and people who had avoided eye contact for days suddenly began stopping by her desk. Mark quietly showed her an email requesting a confidential interview with Human Resources. Less than a minute later, Sarah approached holding the exact same message on her phone. Before lunchtime, 3 more employees received identical invitations, and conversations that had previously stopped whenever Richard appeared now resumed openly in the hallways. At almost the same moment, Emily Carter emerged from a conference room, looking visibly shaken. One of Claire's longtime clients had just ended a meeting early after asking technical questions Emily couldn't answer, and another client had reportedly requested that Claire return to the account immediately. Richard tried to continue his day as though nothing had happened, but everyone could see the difference. For the first time since removing Claire from her clients, he wasn't directing the situation anymore. Human Resources had taken control, witnesses were beginning to speak, clients were asking difficult questions, and the investigation had officially moved beyond Claire's personal complaint into something much larger than he had ever anticipated. Next chapter will reveal what the first employee interviews uncovered, and why one forgotten email became the strongest piece of evidence yet. The atmosphere in the office changed overnight. The whispered conversations stopped the moment HR finished interviewing the first group of employees. Because nobody had to guess anymore, everyone knew an official investigation was underway. Richard still walked through the department pretending nothing had happened, greeting people with the same confident smile, but almost no one smiled back. Managers who usually stopped by his office now kept walking, and employees who once waited for his approval suddenly seemed much more interested in answering emails from human resources than attending his meetings. Claire noticed the change the moment she arrived. Her inbox contained 3 new messages. 2 were from longtime clients asking when she would be returning to their accounts. The third was from HR, requesting copies of several old presentations Richard had claimed Emily created herself. Claire forwarded the files immediately. Every presentation had been saved months before Emily had even joined the department, complete with timestamps, revision history, and Claire's name in the document properties. Just before noon, Melissa Grant called Claire back to HR. This meeting lasted less than 15 minutes, but it changed everything. Melissa explained that the first employee interviews had produced nearly identical statements. Mark described Richard asking whether Claire's appearance could affect client relationships. Sarah confirmed hearing him say clients would notice the scar before they noticed the presentation. 2 additional managers, interviewed separately, repeated almost the same conversation. None of them had spoken to one another beforehand, which made their accounts far more credible. Melissa then slid a printed email across the table. Richard had sent it to another executive only hours before removing Claire from her accounts. In it, he wrote that the department needed a fresher face for high-value client relationships. Melissa tapped the sentence with her pen. "This email wasn't provided by Mr. Collins," she said. "Our IT department recovered it from the company archive." Claire didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The evidence was beginning to speak louder than anyone in the building. When Claire returned to the office, another surprise was waiting. David Harrison had arrived in person. He refused to begin his scheduled strategy meeting until he spoke with senior management. Richard tried to greet him in the conference room, but David interrupted before he could finish the first sentence. "I'm here because I want Claire Bennett back on my account," he said loud enough for several employees outside the room to hear. "For 9 years, she's solved every problem we've brought to this company. Yesterday I was told she stepped away voluntarily. Today I find out that wasn't true. I don't appreciate being misled." Before Richard could respond, another client joined the video conference and made the same request. Within the next hour, 2 additional accounts contacted the company asking whether Claire would be returning. What had started as an internal HR investigation was now becoming a business problem. Clients were no longer discussing marketing strategies or contract renewals. They were asking why one of the company's most trusted executives had disappeared overnight. That afternoon, an unexpected calendar notification appeared across the executive team. "Emergency leadership meeting. Attendance required." Richard disappeared into the boardroom, carrying a folder so thick it barely fit under his arm. He didn't come out for nearly 2 hours. When the doors finally opened, the executives left one by one without speaking to anyone. Richard walked out last. His tie was loose, his face had lost its usual confidence, and for the first time all week, he didn't look toward Claire's desk. 10 minutes later, Melissa called Claire one final time before the end of the day. "I can't discuss tomorrow's decision," she said carefully, "but I can tell you one thing. The investigation is complete, and the leadership team now has everything it needs." Claire thanked her, ended the call, and looked across the office. Richard's office door was closed. Emily sat quietly at her desk, staring at a stack of files she hadn't touched for almost 20 minutes. Everyone seemed to understand the same thing. By this time tomorrow, someone's career would never be the same again. Next chapter. The company announces its final decision, and Richard is forced to face the consequences in front of the very people he tried to impress. The following morning, Claire arrived at the office expecting another ordinary day of waiting. Instead, an email marked "Mandatory Executive Meeting" appeared in her inbox less than 10 minutes after she logged in. It included only a conference room number and a starting time. no explanation. As she walked through the office, she noticed the unusual silence. Conversations stopped, not because people were afraid, but because everyone knew the investigation had reached its conclusion. Even Richard's office door was open, something Claire had never seen since he became manager. His desk was almost empty except for a laptop and a single folder. The executive conference room was already full when Claire entered. Melissa Grant sat beside the company's vice president of operations, while two board representatives occupied seats at the end of the table. Richard and Emily were already there. Richard looked exhausted, as though he hadn't slept at all. Melissa opened the meeting by thanking everyone who had participated in the investigation before summarizing the findings. The evidence showed there had been no performance issues, no client complaints, and no legitimate business reason to remove Claire from her accounts. Multiple employees had independently confirmed Richard's comments about Claire's appearance. Archived emails supported those statements, and several major clients had verified they had been given false information about Claire stepping away voluntarily. Melissa concluded by saying the company had determined that management decisions had been influenced by discriminatory judgment rather than business necessity, exposing the company to significant legal and financial risk. The vice president spoke next. He apologized directly to Claire on behalf of the company for allowing those decisions to stand without proper review. He then announced that effective immediately, Claire would be reinstated as senior client executive with full responsibility for every account that had been transferred. Any client wishing to continue working with her would be reassigned without delay. The company would also conduct mandatory leadership training on workplace discrimination and management ethics, while HR would review future executive decisions involving employee reassignment to prevent similar situations from happening again. Richard finally asked if he could respond. His voice was noticeably quieter than anyone had ever heard before. He admitted that he believed clients would react negatively after Claire's accident, and convinced himself he was protecting the business. He insisted he had never intended to hurt her personally, but as he spoke, even he seemed to realize how weak the explanation sounded against weeks of documented decisions. The vice president listened without interrupting before delivering the company's decision. Richard was removed from his management position effective immediately, and his employment with the company would end following the completion of the required administrative process. No one celebrated. The room remained completely silent. Emily spoke only after Richard had finished. She turned toward Claire and apologized for accepting the accounts without asking why they had been reassigned. She admitted she had believed Richard when he said Claire wanted to reduce her workload after the accident. Claire thanked her for telling the truth during the investigation and told her the responsibility belonged to the person who had made the decision, not to the employee who had trusted her manager. It wasn't forgiveness for everything that had happened, but it allowed both women to leave the room without carrying unnecessary resentment into the future. Over the next several days, Claire contacted each of her former clients personally. Almost every conversation ended the same way. They welcomed her back, not because of sympathy, but because they trusted the work she had delivered for years. David Harrison laughed when she called and said, "I was wondering how long it would take the company to realize they already had the right person." One by one, the accounts returned, projects resumed, meetings filled her calendar again. This time, nobody questioned whether she belonged in the room. Several weeks later, Claire walked into another client presentation. The same conference room, the same projector, the same responsibility she had carried for nearly 20 years. The only difference was that she no longer felt the need to prove she deserved to be there. She simply did her job, just as she always had. When the meeting ended, the client shook her hand and thanked her for another successful presentation. Not one person mentioned the scar on her face. They talked about results, strategy, and the future of the partnership, the things that had always mattered. Looking back, Claire realized the accident had changed her life in ways she never expected. But it had also revealed something important. Character isn't measured by how someone looks after surviving hardship. It's measured by how people choose to treat others when they think no one is watching. Richard had made his choice, and eventually the truth caught up with him. Claire made hers every single day she came back to work. If this story has one lesson, it's this. Your appearance may shape someone's first impression, but your integrity shapes the ending they remember. The end.